Welcome to our class on Chassidus. We're going to be learning a beautiful Chassidic discourse from the Rebbe. The name of the Chassidic discourse is called וידבר אלקים הדברים, האלה לאמר. The Rebbe said this Chassidic discourse in Shabbos Parshas Yisroi, that year was the 18th day in the month of Shvat, in the year Tavshin Chav Dalet, 60 years ago. So again, the Chassidic discourse is based on the verse in this week's Torah portion when it says, "Vayidamar Elekim advarim ha'ela lamer." God said all these words in reference to the Ten Commandments, lamer saying. So the Alter Rebbe asks a question: what does it mean, lamer? To say to other people. The fact is, when God gave the Torah, everybody was there. Everybody was present at Matan Torah. So what does it mean when it says lamer? So what does that mean? That when a person learns Torah, so like the verse says in the prophets, Tan l'shayni imrasecha, and besides the fact that when you're learning Torah, Hashem is learning with you, but like we say before the prayers, before Shemon Esrei, Hashem svasai tiftach, and then Tan l'shayni imrasecha, and what does that mean? That every single person, when you're learning Torah, you have the lamer, and it was just like when we received them the first time, that when Moshe received the Torah from Hashem, that when a person's learning Torah, you have the power, and I'll say it in Hebrew, and I'll translate it, of Shechina midaberes mitoich groinoi, that the presence, the energy of Hashem is coming through your throat as you are reciting and learning the words of Torah. Rabbi says, 1 second, we have to understand what is the difference between learning Torah and doing mitzvot. In other words, that when a person learns Torah, you're able to reach the level, just like Moshe Rabbeinu. That we say when Moshe Rabbeinu learned Torah, the Torah came just through him. It was exactly what Hashem said. When we learn Torah, we can achieve the same level. However, when it comes to doing mitzvot, the fact is there's a lot of commandments that we can't do today. Matter of fact, after the temple was destroyed, many commandments don't apply today. In other words, when it comes to learning Torah, besides the fact that you have laws, for example, of judgment, which applies today, damages, etc., but even the laws, for example, of holiness and purity, which doesn't technically apply today, you can learn every piece of Torah you can learn today. So the same thing also, just like in Torah, we learn every part of Torah, why shouldn't we be able to do every type of mitzvah? And as we know that learning Torah, why do we learn Torah? Torah is to do the mitzvahs. But in reality we see that there are many mitzvot which only apply in the land of Israel. And many other mitzvahs were nullified. And in the mitzvahs that are left over, there are unfortunately many people, the Rebbe says, that can't perform the mitzvahs because they're in a situation which is called in Hebrew an einus. They're in a situation where physically they're not able to do the mitzvahs. And the Torah says that if someone's in a situation where they can't do a mitzvah, so they're exempt from doing the mitzvah. And especially the Rebbe says, our brothers that are in exile and that they're being held up, and they're not allowing them to learn Torah. In other words, they're concealing from them. For those that obviously that don't believe in Hashem and don't believe in the giver of Torah and don't believe in the giver of the mitzvahs, and therefore they cannot fulfill the mitzvahs. And the Rebbe says, and who's there? It's not just simple people that don't want to learn Torah and do mitzvahs. Those are very, very special Jewish people that they would love to learn Torah. They'd love to, more importantly, do the mitzvahs, and they can't do it. And it says, matter of fact, it says in the Talmud, it says something very, very powerful. And I'll say it in Hebrew. In other words, had they whipped Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they wouldn't be able to withstand the test. And that is referring to when it comes to the three cardinal transgressions of Gilui Arayos, Shlichus Dam, and Avodah Zarah, forbidden relationships, God forbid, killing someone in idolatry, and in reference to these great people. And here the Rebbe says it's many generations that they're standing in Mesiras Nefesh, they're going in self-sacrifice. And even today, they're standing in self-sacrifice. But nevertheless, they're not letting them to observe the mitzvot. And so if that's the case, why is it so? And what's the difference between Torah and mitzvahs? Because the fact is, Torah, you can learn today Torah. Any person, any place can learn Torah. And you can learn any section of Torah, whether it applies or not. However, when it comes to mitzvot, there are certain mitzvahs don't apply today. And even the ones that do apply today, people are in situations where unfortunately they can't do the mitzvahs. And the question is, what's the basic difference? Rabbi says we're going to understand this with an introduction a beautiful, powerful Chassidic discourse from the Mittler Rebbe, and there says that's written in reference to this Chassidic discourse, that this Chassidic discourse that they heard from the Mittler Rebbe, that the Mittler Rebbe said he heard it several years before, and it was a very, very trying time for the Jewish people when they were taking Jewish people and they were forcing them to join the Russian army, and because of that they weren't able to stay connected to God. So this is the Chassidic discourse the Mittler Rebbe said. And he starts over there to explain, and he says, and to understand this idea, like why is it, and what is it that caused the people to be in this situation? And he explains over there as follows. And the Rebbe says, in short, he's giving a synopsis what the Mittler Rebbe explains, the second Chabad Rebbe, that it says in the verse, Roitza Hashem es Yireyav. What is Roitza? What does God want? He wants those that are in awe of Hashem. That's one verse. And the other verse says, Ritzon Yireyav Yaseh. The will of those that are in awe of Hashem, that's what Hashem does. In other words, what does that mean? So you see that what Hashem wants is those that are in awe of Him, and those that are in awe of Him, their will Hashem fulfills. What does will mean? So he says this will that it's referring to, what type of will is it? It's a will which is above logic, which is above intellect. And that's the will that Hashem has for us to learn Torah and to do mitzvahs. And he explains, what does that mean? It's the will above logic. He says it because generally speaking, there's two types of wills. There's one type of will which is above logic, above intellect. And the other one is below logic. What does that mean? Now, when it comes to the will, which is basically above logic we call Chachma Bina Das, Chabad. So that will, you're able to bring it down onto the lowest level. What does that mean practically? That means when a person becomes, in Hebrew it's called a akshus, in English it's called stubborn. When someone's stubborn, means they're willing to learn Torah and do mitzvahs even if it doesn't make sense, even if they're struggling, they're going to do it anyway. On a spiritual level, what does that mean? There's a concept in Kabbalah and Chassidut that there's something which is called a tam kamas. A lot of the mitzvos, they're like they're a hidden reason. So that's Ratzoin, the will, which is above logic. A, the way it's by Hashem, it's a tam kamas, a hidden secret, and B, the way we observe mitzvahs without making any calculations. That's, so to speak, one level. But then there's a will which is below logic. What is that? So the Rebbe brings, the author explains in Tanya that when a person understands something, so then that's good. He understands it, and because he understands it, therefore he loves it. And when a person understands that something is not good, so then he hates the idea. So his starting point is logic. If logic tells him it's a good thing, he loves it. If logic tells him it's not a good thing, he doesn't love it. So it's also a will, but the will is coming after the logic. And what does it mean that the will is higher than logic? In other words, like we explained before, that's the idea about being stubborn, But the question says, but that's the way by us. But in reference to Hashem, you can't say God from Hashem is stubborn. So we use the term what? Idea of a tam kamas, a hidden reason, and that's why the verse says, Roitza Hashem is Yireyav. What does Hashem want? He wants those that are in awe of Hashem, and that's the general will of Torah mitzvahs, which is basically above logic. Anything in Torah, it comes from above logic. This is the will of Hashem. Mitzvahs is the will of Hashem. Now, even though, one second, what did we just learn? That the will of Hashem, Torah mitzvahs, is above logic. But the fact is, Rabbi says, one second, but the fact is, in the mitzvahs, we have statutes, and we have mishpatim, laws. Now, for example, what's considered a statute, Rabbi said? Like, for example, the red heifer. Or, for example, shatnez, the two types of linen and wool that you're not allowed to have in a garment. And we know when it comes to the chukim, the statutes, the nations of the world, they ridicule us, they make fun of us. However, when it comes to logical mitzvahs, for example, Sukkot, why do we sit in the sukkah? Because God, when we left Egypt, He put us in the Sukkot booths, and we sit in the sukkah so the generation should know what happened in the past. Or, for example, that we don't eat the hind quarter from the animal, and like it says in the Torah, that because Yaakov is need, so therefore we don't eat it. In other words, there's a reason. The mishpatim have a reason for it. But the fact is, when you have a reason and you don't have a reason, it's not only to answer the nations of the world, so to speak, but the truth is, all the mitzvahs don't have a reason. And especially, the details of the mitzvahs don't have a reason. And on a spiritual level, like the Alter explains in Tanya, and that when the Jewish people, when we do a mitzvah, and like, for example, the example of a wise person, that he says very, very deep ideas, and the person, so to speak, that's receiving it is repeating what the person says, but the fact is, he can't explain on the same level, because obviously you're not the same level as a teacher. But so why do we do it? Because we believe that obviously there's deep understanding that what the person's teaching us, and that's how we do the mitzvah. So even though we do understand things, we have reason for things. Why do we do it? We do it because we know that Hashem wants us to do the mitzvah. There's very, very deep logic, deep understanding, which we'll never understand. But the Rebbe says, if that's the case, it's not understood. The fact is, if that's the case, after the temple was destroyed, most mitzvahs don't apply today anymore. And for example, there's 613 commandments. There's 365 negative commandments and 248 positive commandments. Out of the 248 positive commandments, how many commandments apply today? 87 commandments. However, when it comes to the negative precepts, most of them, yes, do apply today. But nevertheless, also many of them don't apply today. And the question then back is, what's the difference? Why, when it comes to Torah, everything applies today? And when it comes to mitzvahs, even though, so to speak, it's above logic, but nevertheless, many of them don't apply today. And Rebbe explains everything. He says as follows. What is the idea of a mitzvah? What's the idea of a commandment? It's the will of Hashem. Now, so on one hand, it's the will of Hashem, but a mitzvah, if no one does the mitzvah, it doesn't happen. So the mitzvah, even though it's the will of Hashem, it's dependent on our will down here in this world that we should do the mitzvahs. So the mitzvahs come from Hashem, but it's dependent on us doing it. And like the Rebbe brings and it says, like we say in the prayers, because we sinned, unfortunately we left the land of Israel. In other words, what does that mean? That we're lacking the will to do the mitzvahs of Hashem. In other words, what's lacking is to turn to Hashem, and because what's lacking is our doing the mitzvahs, so therefore what's missing is the will of Hashem, that Hashem wants to do the mitzvahs, and therefore the mitzvahs are missing. So as Rebbe is saying, it's very simple. What is the mitzvah? The mitzvah is the will of Hashem, but we need to do it. If we don't do it, then the will of Hashem doesn't exist, and therefore you don't have all the 248 positive commandments, and you also don't have all the 365 negative commandments. But Rebbe says, even though yes, correct. Because we sinned, we're not in the land of Israel. But the punishment should have been in other things. We should have other punishments. Not that we can't do the mitzvah, and that we're missing actually from the mitzvahs. Because the fact is, let's say we decide we're doing tshuva. We want to return to Hashem. How can you go ahead and do the mitzvahs? We don't have the land of Israel. We don't with the temple, etc. So how can we do the mitzvahs? But so what does that mean? What is a mitzvah? A mitzvah is the will of Hashem on high. And what happens is when we're not doing our part, so our part is missing. So that affects that the will doesn't exist. And that's the internal warning that the prophets gave the Jewish people: do the will of Hashem. Because if you don't do the will of Hashem, besides the fact when you don't do the will of Hashem, you're not going to get the energy flowing down, but what also you're going to be missing, which the more important part is you're going to be missing the revelation of the will of Hashem. Now, even though that what we're left over with is 87 commandments that do apply today, but nevertheless, we all know the attribute of justice is coming and complaining that even the 87 mitzvahs that we have left out of 248, we're not doing it. And when we do it, there's an expression called, we do it mitzvahs hanashim alamada. We just do it by rote. We're not excited. We're not compassionate. We just check it off the list. And what's lacking is the love and awe, which that's the wings that cause us to fly and high. And the attribute of justice is complaining and saying even we should even lose these 87 mitzvahs that we have left. But so nevertheless, comes along and they respond and they say, no, there are Jewish people. And even though they're, let's say, a minority, but a minority, interesting in Judaism, in certain places considered like a majority. And like, for example, it says in the Torah, "V'nafal mimenu rav," that many are going to fall off. So Rashi says even one is considered a majority. So this minority, which we're going to call a majority, and they are standing strong, and they're standing in a situation where they're trying to hold them back from learning Torah and the mitzvahs, and the person that are trying to hold back from learning Torah and the mitzvahs, and they scream out to Hashem, "Alalali," which means Keli, lama zavtani, Hashem, why have you forsaken me? Why is that so? And those, why aren't they letting me do mitzvahs, the 87 that are left over? And this, that a person is in pain that he can't do the mitzvahs, what does that show? It shows we're not doing it because out of rote we're trying to check it off a list. Because the fact is, and this is a powerful line Rabbi says, pain is connected to pleasure. Why is somebody in pain when they can't do something? Because they get pleasure from doing it. And because we get so much pleasure from learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, if somebody's holding you back from learning Torah and mitzvahs, you're going to be in pain. And the fact that when we're in pain because we can't do a mitzvah is a proof that we have pleasure from doing the mitzvahs. And therefore, afterwards, when you're able to do the mitzvah, you do it with love for Hashem, and awe for Hashem, with tainug, deep pleasure, and all the excitement. And the reason is because we were, unfortunately, in a desert. And this takes away the complaint of the attribute of judgment. In other words, not only that we shouldn't lose the few mitzvahs that we have left, the 87 mitzvahs, but that causes that Hashem should give us more mitzvahs, and that the third temple should be rebuilt, and we'll have back all the mitzvahs. And obviously, we explained before that the reason why the mitzvahs are lacking, we don't have all 248 practically, that's because we didn't have the will to do it, and therefore we lost it. And therefore we can't bring down the energy that the mitzvahs make happen. So based on this, Rebbe explains beautifully, and he says that's the difference when it comes to the positive commandments. That most of the positive commandments, because there's 248 positive commandments, there's 87 left, so most of the positive commandments don't exist. And what's left over 87 is a minority. However, when it comes to negative precepts, we actually have the opportunity to fulfill most of them. Why is that? Because what's the purpose of positive commandment? To bring down energy. And unfortunately, we're in Gullus, we can't bring down the energy. And that's why we don't have most of the positive commandments. And like the example that Rebbe gives, let's say, for example, someone that's not well. So there's different types of treatments that someone gets when they're not well. It depends, depending on the type of sickness, and from one extreme to the next. However, and depending on the type of sickness, that's the type of medicine you have to heal it. However, to prevent someone getting sick, and matter of fact, the more someone is sick, so you need to have more of a prevention in place, and that's strong by everybody. And therefore, when it comes to the positive commandments, what's left over is 87, because that's all we have to heal. However, when it comes to negative, everyone has the ability and the right to total protection. And that's what this is what we say that for the Jewish people. That this is also possible. In other words, it's not, God forbid, it's a punishment. But the reason is it shouldn't be anyone complaining. And on the contrary, it's coming from a place of kindness. Like explained in the Chassidic discourse before, that we know that Torah is Torah of Chesed. The Torah of Hashem is all about Chesed. And on the contrary, this that when we turn to Hashem and we say, Keli, why is it so? Keli, God, why have you forsaken me? How is it possible when we complain to Hashem? That shows that we really want the connection. And it shows that the learning Torah and doing mitzvahs is not an external thing that we're checking off the list, but it's part of who we are. It's internally who we are. And that when we turn to Hashem in that manner, that causes that Hashem should give us back all the mitzvahs. So based on what Rebbe explains, we'll understand what it says in the Medrash, that Avraham Avinu asked Hashem, how are the Jewish people going to have atonement? So Hashem said, very simple. They're going to go to the temple, and they're going to bring sacrifices. And by bringing sacrifice, they're going to have atonement. So Avraham Avinu says to Hashem, okay, that's correct. When the times of the temple, you have the temple, they can go to the sacrifice, they bring the sacrifice in the temple. But after the temple is destroyed, what are they going to do? So Hashem said, whoever is busy learning the laws of an oila, a sacrifice, it's as if he brought the sacrifice. And if you're learning the laws of a chatas, a different type of sacrifice, as if you brought the sacrifice. So what does that mean? So Rabbi explains as follows. In other words, seemingly there was a very simple question. What do we need all this for? In other words, we learned before that when someone's in pain, that you can't do the mitzvah, so that shows that you have pleasure from doing the mitzvah. So why is that not enough? And the answer is, yeah, you're in pain, you can't do the mitzvah, and Hashem says, wow, they really want to do the mitzvah. But that's not enough. You need the action. You need to do the mitzvah. You need to learn the Torah. And this is what Avraham Avinu asked Hashem. Yes, in the times of temple, yes, they have action. They can come to the temple and bring the sacrifice. But after the destruction, how are they going to do it? So Hashem says, yes, unfortunately, when they don't have the temple, they will be able to accomplish it by learning Torah. Now, the Rebbe says, 1 second, you can ask a very simple question, but he said you shouldn't ask it. Now, seemingly, if Torah accomplishes it like Hashem told Avraham Avinu, so why is in the times of the temple they have to bring sacrifices? Learn Torah about the sacrifices. In other words, we're not saying that when you learn Torah, it's like it's plan B. And therefore, if you only had Torah, if you only learn Torah in the times of the temple, it would be in a way that you're learning Torah, but you're not learning in order to do, or you're learning in order not to do. And that's what Hashem says. Why are you telling me the statutes? However, that's in the times of the temple when you could bring the sacrifice. However, in the times of exile, learning Torah is like doing it. Learning Torah accomplishes the action. In the times of the temple, you can learn Torah, but you still have to do the action. Today we can't do the action, so the Torah accomplishes the Torah and the action. And that's why it says, when you learn Torah, it's as if you brought the sacrifice. And with the letter Chaf, it means it's if you brought it up. What's the letter Chaf? It's connecting the idea of Keter, the highest sphere of Keser, which is higher than Torah, because we know Torah is Chachma. Torah is Chachma, Ke, the Chaf is Keser, which is higher, and in its source is actually the level of Keter, and that's connected to the idea of Ratzon, the lower part of Keter, which is basically the hidden secret. And that's why Hashem spread us out all over the world, up until the point that unfortunately they're holding us back from learning Torah and doing mitzvahs to show that we are doing it in a real way. And because when we can't do it, we reach out to Hashem and we say we want to do it. Now, you can ask, but the fact is, there are certain people that got so stuck in exile, so sunk into exile, and they don't even scream to Hashem. But on this, the Rebbe says, we say that since, he quotes a verse that says that we transformed the idea, and things get refined, and then you have, unfortunately, people that doing it. So it's like, for example, it gives the example. It's like when you have silver and you want to purify it. So when you go through the purification process, so the coarse pieces fall off, and that's also basically like there's exception to the rule, but it's not necessarily, that's not the main people. But the fact is, you can say, but seemingly, if the whole purpose is to show that the Jewish people are doing it, that they really believe it, so it's enough to take one person, and he'll be the leading example. But the fact is that there are 1,000 souls, and every person has a place in the world, and therefore everyone has to go through the process. And that's why it says, Vidaber Lakim, God spoke all these words saying. What does that mean? That this is the major difference. Like we're going back to the original point, what the Torah Mitzvah is as follows. That when a person learns Torah, and only through learning Torah, you're able to reach very, very high levels, up to the level of that the Shekhinah, Hashem's presence, is going through your throat as you're learning Torah. However, the fact is when it comes to mitzvahs, sadly, there are certain people that aren't able to do the mitzvahs. And the purpose is, again, not God forbid we shouldn't do it, but to test the Jewish people, to show that Torah and mitzvahs is so precious, and it actually affects me internally. And that's the reason why that many, many people, and even a small amount is considered like a majority, that they stand in self-sacrifice. Not only in reference to the three cardinal sins that you technically could transgress, but they go ahead and they stand in self-sacrifice, and in the way that they teach their children and their children's children the day that we stood at Mount Sinai. And they were able to establish generations of the Jewish people learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, and by doing that, we affect, there should not be any Kitrug, anyone speaking negative, any negative energy against the Jewish people, and we should say for all the pain and the suffering is enough. And Hashem should take us out from the constraints of exile to the abundance, literally. And like I said, with all the commentaries, like the Alter Rebbe explains, and like the previous Rebbe explains, and it should happen very, very soon, very, very quickly. So you have another beautiful Chassidic discourse of the Rebbe, the power of Torah, the power of mitzvahs, and literally by learning Torah and by doing mitzvahs out of love, we will all merit for the coming of Mashiach. Let's hope the next class will be Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. Have a great and blessed week. Shavua Tov.